music sucks and I want to die.
Yep. I'm Jake.
I'm Matt.
And today is a big one.
If you didn't hate us already.
Yeah, this episode is going to make you fucking hate our guts. We're going to go into how to critique music in general, like if you can, and what ways it differs from critiquing other things like film or like dance or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways that makes music like a special kind of art form and what makes it such a pain in the ass to actually talk about.
Yeah. I will say, right off the bat, get it out of the way, no matter what we come up with, we are correct.
Yes.
And if you don't agree, you are wrong and stupid and your taste sucks.
Yeah, and you should probably die.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, now that we got that out of the way, I figured a nice and logical place to start is like the things in music that you can, I guess, measure specifically and the things you can't. I guess what is objective and what is subjective.
That we can kind of say, like, without a doubt, these are things that everyone who has any idea what they're talking about will agree with.
Yes. And things you can listen for and literally like, measure.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with objectivity in music.
Okay. So I have large amounts of notes here. So the first thing, the most obvious, is like the length of a song, right? Or the length of an album or the length of whatever. This is a number you can measure and it has certain implications. You know, if something's 45 minutes long, Probably sucks. I'm not gonna fucking listen to it. I'm never listening to that Deer Hunter album or a 5-album thing.
I think it's 6.
Oh, cool. I'm never listening to that in my entire life. Not only because I hate Deer Hunter, but
well, that's just like your opinion.
Well, yeah. And we're gonna get into that. It's gonna be sick. Okay.
I mean, yeah, we don't have to go through all these, honestly. But like, just to say a length of the song,
Yeah.
we could say like the instrumentation, the chords being used, the melody,
Yeah.
like
the complexity of everything, the harmonic rhythm, everything is, you know.
Yeah, I mean, not even like complex, like literally just like they use this chord, they use this progression, they use
And
this scale,
They use this to get to this. Yeah. There's a drum fill going into the chorus.
Again, these are all things that can clearly be identified and like written out and being like they do this and that is a fact.
As well as like, you know, release year, like what context it's being released in.
Yeah, context is actually important in this too.
So you can mostly analyze context pretty accurately in a lot of senses. There's some reasons you can't, but
context, intent, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
But context, yes.
Yeah. So those are kind of the things you can objectively measure. And then there are some things you can't. And this is where things kind of differ from areas like film, which we'll talk about later, is like you can't really determine what effect your music's going to have on a given listener.
Yes.
And while humans do like generally respond to certain stimuli if they're brought up in certain environments, music is like a whole nother fucking planet, dude.
All right, I think we should go into how is music different than the other art forms, just to really kind of narrow down what we're going to really be talking about here, because what we say might not apply to film or dance, like you were saying before.
Yeah.
So music being, well, there's some gray areas with some other art forms, I think, but music is not tangible.
No. Yeah.
I mean, you can buy the album and you can like hold it, but that's not really the art itself.
Nope.
This is just sound, okay? And everything else, like, I can go buy a painting. I can go see a play. I can buy a movie, whatever. Like, this is something I can experience with more than one sense.
Yes.
And
I'm glad you said that, because that is the thing that makes music most unique, is it uses exactly one sense of your 5 senses, right?
I don't know. Sometimes some music's so good that I like shit myself, and then I can smell the shit.
That's just the brown note, dude.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, dumbass. All right. So music is literally completely auditory. And you can start talking about things like crazy live performances, but that's like performance art. That's a whole nother.
Yeah, I guess we could, okay, live music is different here, but we're talking just about like a song on its own merits right now.
So yeah, it uses exactly one sense, and that differs from literally every single other form except for like literature and reading.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm going to get into later, is why written literature may be the closest thing to music.
Okay.
And that's, maybe I'll be completely wrong and I'll get a bunch of hate mail. But whatever. Let's start with film, because that's the thing that a lot of people like to criticize. It's probably it's definitely easier to criticize film because there's a lot more elements to it. You have to get things right visually. You have to get things right audio-wise, like on a technical level.
Yes, and I feel like there's more defined definition of what right means in those sense.
Yeah, because like film in general is like, I almost want to say it's like more human. Like you have to have more humanity involved.
I think it's easier to relate.
Yeah.
I think that's really what it is.
Or it even has to be more relatable to be
Yeah,
successful.
I forget the fucking like percentage or whatever. But if you're watching a movie, it's like something like 90% of what you're seeing is all visual, like the like sound and the soundtrack and the sound effects and everything like that. That's like barely noticeable when you're watching a movie to most people.
Okay. Yeah, no, I can believe that. Film music is a supplemental.
Well, yeah. I mean, not even just that in general. Just as like how we as humans, like if we have something visual in front of us, we tend to prefer to like think about the visual aspect as opposed to the like, auditory part.
And that's because, you know, you could probably base this on like survival of the old times, right? Like sight is the most used sense.
Yeah.
Humans don't have the greatest ears in the world, although in a lot of ways they're really good. And we'll probably not talk about that today because that's stupid. But yeah, so film has a lot of visual information. And when you're filming something, there's a lot more things you can just fuck up entirely, and you can totally point out and laugh and like, this just looks stupid.
Yeah, it's a little easier to find these moments, whereas if someone, say, screws up a note on a solo or something, you know, maybe not most people would catch that.
Right. Whereas if someone has the Starbucks cup in a frame in a medieval show...
That would never happen. I don't know what you're talking about.
So yeah, basically, film has a lot of different aspects that you can criticize, and like scripts have to be like in your language generally or have subtitles. So there's a whole nother thing to, you know what I mean? There's just so much more to latch onto. Whereas again, in music, you just have one sense. And that's kind of the same thing with dance. You know what I mean? You have the visual element of syncing with music. And you also have an added thing there of like technicality.
Technicality, also, I think story
too. And
story,
like
narrative and things like that, which music has, but not in the visual way that dance does.
Yeah, and even if music does have those things with, you know, lyrics and such, but they're also not a huge part of the song in general. Like they can be, but
yeah, it depends. I guess
it depends. It depends, but like it's not always a huge part of the song. Sometimes it's no part of the song,
right?
Which is why no one listens to instrumental music. But hey, we'll get there. And then like visual art is a tough one to compare because it kind of only uses one sense, but it uses more of again, visualizing. There's so much more context.
Yeah, I think it also only uses one sense. Yeah. But there seems to be again, I'm not an art critic. I don't really know shit about art, but there seems to be a more like concrete definition of like things that people look for in visual art.
Yeah.
You know, not putting like experimental pieces in there, and that also we can talk about that with music.
Yeah.
But as far as just like uses, like color theory is a big thing, or like just like the brush strokes, or like the textures.
Yeah, or what method you're using to create it.
Things like that. That to me feels a little more solidified, I guess, in the artistic community of things to look for.
Right.
Which I guess you could argue about the same thing with music, but I think the difference is most people don't have a ton of interest in visual art outside of like some basic things they like. Yeah. You don't see them going to fucking modern art museums or openings like that.
Yeah.
Whereas everybody listens to music.
Every single person. Yeah. And when you said like things about experimental thing, I also want to get out of the way now. So experimental music gets fucking insane.
Yeah.
Like we've all seen like, you know, weird like performance art, and like, you know, I've seen like video like performance art of like someone having like fake diarrhea on stage.
Fun.
And it's like it's like pretty weird, but it's still like got an element of humanity to it. Even like the weird but music can just be fucking experimental music. What's the weirdest experimental music I've ever heard?
Something like for me like Merzbow. I don't think I've talked about him before, but like, you know, purposely finding these sort of like frequencies and pitches that like actually kind of affect you physically. Yeah. And this is kind of, I guess, going out of the, we're into the like the beyond senses.
The meta senses.
Yes. But, you know, he, you know, intentionally finds these things that actually make you uncomfortable. And I think if you're watching someone take a shit on stage, you can clearly be like, this guy is pooping, and that makes me uncomfortable, and I don't like it. But if I listen to Merzbow, I'm not like, oh, you know, he's using this fucking Hertz combined with this sound to make me feel uncomfortable. Like, you can't really do that.
Yeah, and music is a fucking huge world, dude. But there is one form of art that I think is closest to music, and I mentioned it before, and it's the language arts. It's things like written down books, poetry, even comedy to a certain extent. A little less so comedy because, you know, you have jokes are generally based on like human experience and relatability, like film. But like, think of like the versatility of the written word, right? So language has, been around forever. Music's probably older than language. But
Wait, isn't music a language?
oh shit. No. Okay, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what languages do. This is complicated. Okay, that's the other thing to mention is we're actually really stupid. We're not qualified to have this conversation at all. But we're going to fucking try, okay?
Man.
So, the written medium, I would say, is the only thing that comes close to music in terms of like versatility, like even like experimentalism can get fucking weird in music or in written books, and it uses only one sense and quite a bit of the imagination. So, and again, it has a huge range of implications. Like music can be, behind some shitty commercial, or it can be this grand orchestra piece, or as books could be like a fucking manual for my toaster. And also like Finnegan's Wake by Joyce, right? So huge amount of versatility. It's been explored like as much as music has. It's gotten fucking weird.
Yeah.
I've read some modern poetry.
Sucks.
It sucks now. But yeah, so I would say language arts are the closest to music.
Again, though, I think the big difference there is that's still something tangible.
Yeah,
And I think that's why people have such a hard time with like modern music as opposed to modern literature is you can buy the Joyce book and you can sit there and you can even buy the fucking like one with all the footnotes that's explaining everything they're doing in there.
As if the version wasn't long enough already.
Yeah, but I mean, it's still something you can like hold and you're experiencing it in your hands.
Right.
Not music.
Not music. Music is a sound wave. And it's interesting that literally just an intangible sound wave can hit your ears and your brain interprets it as good or bad or like gives you endorphins or maybe makes you want to die in many cases. So
I wouldn't know anything about that.
music is so interesting, and it's the only form of media that is, this unique.
Yes. So now that we've established that we don't know anything about art, let's move on to... Okay, so then how does someone criticize music?
Yes, and being, critics ourselves, we're... Yes, indeed. We, I often try to identify what makes me think about certain things in a certain way, and so I have several notes as to what makes me like music and what makes me hate it, and I have to find it on my several pages here.
Your several pages? You're holding one piece of paper.
I write really small, so...
Several sticky notes.
several sticky notes of paper. So basically what I like in music is, and again, I'm brought up in a society, America, so I have this huge backlog of perceptions and biases, but I like surprise. I like combinations of pre-established conventions being like twisted around and like presented in a new way, or maybe just like in a really effective way that's executed better than other things. Innovation is great. And I really like virtuosity in performance and, just technicality of your playing. And those are kind of, I guess, the things I look for when I try and think of something good. But then it's so much more than that, because even the simplest songs can be.
I think there we go, Elmi. Like everything you just said is basically subjective.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, because these are all perhaps objective qualities in a way, but something like innovative to you might not be innovative to someone else, and they could also be looking for that same category. So perhaps maybe your opinion is higher on the like subjectivity scale than another person's.
Yeah.
But then does that make the piece itself a better song?
That's a tough one. So obviously there are songs that are better than other songs.
Well, that's actually what I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
That's a big common thing. Like art is subjective, music is subjective, and that's something I've said myself. Like I could think your taste sucks, but I'm not going to stop you from enjoying the thing you like.
Yeah, I believe you do think my taste sucks.
I do, Jay. And no, not really, but sometimes.
That's a whole fucking episode.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like maybe I don't even think your taste sucks. Maybe I just think that particular song sucks. But again, I'm not going to stop you from listening to it, and I'm not going to be like, well, you're a fucking retard. But we still have like established artists that are generally determined by our culture to be better than others.
Yes, more deserving of attention.
And if that is the case, then music must have some sort of objectivity to it outside of the simple fact of this chord is used or this melody is
Yes.
used.
Yes, there has to be.
Yes.
Otherwise, we would, each person would have one artist, or they would have their own branch of artists they listen to forever, and there wouldn't be like a Kanye or a giant super mega artist, right?
Or even something like the Beatles.
Yeah,
and
why would the Beatles grip hold that way?
Right, we could sit here and talk about all the great things about the Beatles, but that doesn't necessarily translate to the fact that they are like considered probably the most popular band of all time, right?
Yeah.
So perhaps what we look for and we find is like, okay, well, they use these chord progressions or this harmony, or they do this sort of like subversion kind of thing. And so then if we look at like the typical listener who perhaps doesn't have music knowledge, but they still love the Beatles, is there something in those qualities that we as humans inherently find to be better?
Right.
And I don't know.
And we'll probably do a Beatles episode at some point.
Yeah.
We've talked about it. And it's good. That's a good example to bring up because the Beatles catalog is very wide and has a lot of different influences, but they still sound like the Beatles. And that's a sound that's agreed upon by how many album sales? 330 million or some shit.
Yeah, who knows?
So
and like
they're best-selling recording artists ever. So
and especially 60 years later,
60 years later, we
still talk about the Beatles.
We still talk about the Beatles, and we will for the next 100 years.
And we still talk about Bach, and we still talk about Beethoven and Mozart,
and so I guess that the logical question coming out of this is what defines popularity versus what defines quality.
Well,
or is there a difference? Or is there the same thing?
I don't know if that is the question that comes out of this. I think the question that comes out of this is that either there's some sort of like media conspiracy thing that just determines that these certain artists are better. And honestly, I don't think it's a conspiracy, but I think that is a factor that if enough,
it's definitely a factor.
Enough Rolling Stone magazine or whatever it was back in the day was like, well, that's the thing. Even back in the day, Rolling Stone hated Led Zeppelin.
And yet,
and so, but I do think that is a big factor of what like just the media is telling you, these people are good artists or whatnot.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's the entire story. And I think there are these objective qualities that maybe it's just like a Western thing in this case or something like that. But there is something in music that is beyond the subjective.
There has to be.
Yes.
That's the conclusion I have to come to, is that there's something behind this sound wave that hits human ears in a specific way, probably brought about by society, and the society you live in. It has to be, because the things that certain Eastern cultures value in music is much different than what we value
even
here.
we arbitrarily have 12 tones. Essentially.
Yeah. Why do we do that?
Yeah. There's not real. I mean, yes, there's like a scientific sound of physics reason, but like not all the everyone. No, it's not like agreed upon that there's only 12 tones, right?
No, there's several different tuning systems in the world used today.
Yes, and to us as a Western focused society, if someone is using a microtone or whatever, it tends to make us uncomfortable, or it sounds weird and out of tune. Whereas in other cultures, it's not.
Yeah, and oftentimes I've heard other cultures think of like American pop music as like flat and uninteresting vocally. Because it lacks these great ornamentations or these different modes, different tuning systems.
Or anything out of a 1 octave range.
Or anything out of a 1 octave range. Or anything out of the same hemiola that you hear all the time that I just quoted from my favorite fucking... We're not going there, never mind. So
this is not going to be a furry episode. God damn it.
That was Zootopia, Try Everything. Yeah, so that is a bad song. I like it, I'm sorry. But... where were we going with this, dude?
I don't know. You started talking about your furry interests.
Yeah. No. So we're talking about how, pop music in America is sometimes in other cultures like thought of as a little flatter, a little less interesting. And that's because other cultures may value certain things like melody more than texture.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that is true in a lot of cases. But at the end of the day, they still value certain things over others there too.
Right. I mean, like, if we can, maybe let's just focus into like Western music for a second.
That's the only thing we're pretty much qualified to talk about. So
you listen to all those pop stars around the world.
But I was not born there.
But, even like something simple about like the frequency of two intervals or like an interval being played together, like that. At this point, perhaps not always, but at this point, like certain intervals make us feel a certain way.
Just at their raw state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So obviously that must have some sort of thing to do with this, but then like you put context into this and it's like, a fucking major chord could sound like so out there in like a fucking Schoenberg piece after like all this other stuff happening.
And like the things like a super dissonant interval, like a minor second, right? This interval is really close together. In the midst of like, let's say an E flat 13, the C and the D flat together sound totally fine.
Yep, exactly.
So music is so fucking complicated. Like even at its most basic form, music can be really complicated.
I think really where this is going to end up is that there is somewhat of a spectrum, and perhaps so this is where it gets kind of weird. So like everyone has a different experience, they have different tastes, they grew up with different sounds, and this is going to inform what they consider to be good music or bad music.
Right.
But I think people who take it to the next level and they like really sort of devote their self to music, whether they're musicians or not, but just people who like make music more a bigger part of their life as opposed to just things they listen to, you're going to end up with more experiences and a more informed background. And again, talking like Western focused right now,
yes.
But like, you know, you'll learn about like common chord progressions and, you know, intervals and scales and melody and things like that. And I think that can lead us to being higher on the spectrum of subjectivity.
Yeah. And that's, like you said, when you start getting deeper into a subject, you start branching out past like the very basics, you're going to run into so much subjectivity, and coalescing it into your own opinion is kind of what gives you your own voice. And that's why a lot of people can identify like certain composers, is because they branched out into these subjective regions and combined them in their own unique own unique way. And that's really what their voice is.
I think
is their taste.
Yeah, and then it's like the things you mentioned earlier, like you like these things, and essentially that comes down to your taste.
Yes.
But, you know, I could say have the same exact things I like,
but they could mean
it's totally different things.
It could be the opposite.
But, you know, here we get to be the assholes. If you were saying this versus, you know, fucking Joe Schmo off the street, who doesn't, you know, he like doesn't listen to music that much or whatever, and he says he likes these things, I'm going to value your opinion a lot more on whether a song is good or not.
Yeah, I will also value my opinion.
Well, I know, obviously, but like, you know, and then
that's something I want to talk about. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you.
No, I didn't.
So, studying music does get you like more information. I'm sorry, like a lot of people think music is an inherently subjective art form, and this is something we've been talking about all episode. But if you study music, you will notice a lot of patterns repeated in different ways and in better ways often. And like your opinion is just going to be more informed in every aspect.
Notice like even in our last episode when we talked about like the Blake Shelton and the JW Cud.
Yep.
Not once did we mention the chord progressions.
Nope.
Not once in our entire critique were we like chord progression good or bad, because, you know, as people who have studied music for years and years, we listen to this and it's like, okay, it's fucking pattern 2B or what, you know, like it's not worth bringing up because we've heard this enough like a million times.
Yeah, the pattern can be either good or bad. It depends on so many other factors. You can have a fucking song that stays on one chord the entire time and be awesome.
Exactly.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, where someone who doesn't really know about music or maybe just has like a very basic understanding could be like, oh, they got like a G, C, and then they go to like D.
Yeah.
Oh, whoa.
You know, I mean, that's like Sweet Home Alabama.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like it happens a lot when I like teach, and no disrespect to people learning, obviously, but like, you know, they'll be like, I like this song, I like that song, and like, oh, I didn't really dig this song, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, really doesn't matter because we're playing guitar and like we're not singing, we're not like doing anything. You like you don't like Taylor Swift, and you like Bob Dylan. They have the exact same chord progression.
Yeah,
like I can find two of these songs that are exactly the same as far as like the guitar part goes. Yeah. And so to me, it's a little easier to be like, okay, like I will judge these on other things or whatnot. But like to them, it's like they're just sitting there playing they're just literally strumming chords, and they're like, just the fact that they know it's Taylor Swift.
Yeah, exactly. You know, preconceived notions of pop being bad, which it is, but you don't know that.
Exactly.
I don't want to hear that from you.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh God, and that's another thing that comes down to is like, you can have correct opinions, but if you have your opinions like led up, if your knowledge doesn't lead up correctly, then your opinion's still bad.
Right. I feel like music has its more than all the other arts, although the arts do share this too.
Hell yeah, they do.
But if I went to school and I studied law, or I studied like some science or whatnot, and I came and I had a conversation, and I'd be like, well, I have a degree in biology, and I can tell you blah, 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 blah. And someone would be like, oh, that's interesting. Whereas if you and I go somewhere and like, well, I have a degree in music, and I can tell you blah, 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 everyone just thinks we're assholes.
Yeah. And that's just so funny because, obviously music is more subjective than biology, probably.
I mean, it is, but still the fact that it's like, generally speaking, that like I don't think the public necessarily puts a lot of weight on your opinion, even if you are, a quote unquote educated
expert,
with it or whatnot. They might. I mean, honestly, like they would probably put more opinion on some like fucking 5 Seconds of Summer asshole who's like, hey, I wrote this song and it makes me, I'm using this thing and it's really cool. And they'd be like, wow, he's such a genius.
Yeah. No, that happens all the time where like musicians give like little interviews and whatever, and they talk about their songs and what hits them specifically about it. And it could be the fucking worst, most derivative thing in the universe. And the 200,000 people watching that interview on that stupid morning talk show will like fucking repeat this ad nauseum on the internet and to your face. And you'll just be like, dude, what the fuck are you talking about?
I see it all the time on the internet with like just the most like, not like terrible artists, but just the most like average, mediocre, whatever artists who are just like, oh, he's a musical genius. And it's like, this might be a talented artist. This might be someone who's like, writes really good music, but like, they're not a fucking musical genius. They wrote the same fucking song everyone else did. They just happen to do it better.
Yeah.
And that does not necessarily make you the musical genius.
Yeah. And like musical genius, a lot of the time, to me means, again, this is a subjective opinion, but to me, a musical genius means someone who sustained a relevant like body of work for a long time and also has, pushed music forward in some direction.
I would agree with that.
Generally a good correction, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's all subjective. Doesn't really matter. I'm just saying, like, we even the whole time we're doing this episode, we've been qualifying it as like, oh, it's just our opinion, you don't really know. And like, we talk about music a lot. We know a lot about music.
Yeah, we know some shit, okay? Like, we studied a lot. We've listened to a shitload of music. Like, a shitload.
And then here's the question, Jake. Is our opinion better than other people's?
Well, my answer is yes. Again, this is the wrong way to say this, and
I know, there's no easy way to do it. That's why I asked you instead of saying it.
Yeah, exactly. It has to be better, right? It's just like the same thing. There has to be an objective viewpoint in music to some extent.
Exactly. Well, and I think we can all agree there's objective viewpoints, and then, like I said before, I think there's a spectrum of subjectivity, and certain people are higher on it than others. And I'm not saying you can't enjoy the music, and I'm not saying we can't have differing opinions, but yeah, I would argue that certain people can have a more accurate opinion on if music is good or not.
Yeah. I think you just put it very well. So basically what we're saying is our opinions are fucking awesome. Please listen to our opinions. They're good.
Oh man. Just to get out of our circle jerk here.
Hey, I was enjoying that.
One thing though that I don't think anyone can really account for in music and art in general, but is the Sublime. They did that song Santeria.
Oh boy.
No, I'm just kidding. No, the Sublime, which is the emotional connection to music. And that, to me, does not really have any objectivity to it. And I will say this as someone who's been sort of like emotionally moved by certain songs that otherwise would be crap if I look at it on paper.
Okay.
And this is where I can't necessarily say, oh, your taste is bad because you really connect to that music. Because, I mean, who am I to say what you connect to and what you don't?
And there's a really brief anecdote on this that makes a lot of sense to me. So there was this competition, I think like 5 or 6 years ago, where, your lyrics would be performed by a country singer.
God.
Oh, yeah. That's right. I'm going here. So the winner was this guy who wrote a poem about his, son who died in Iraq, and he drives his truck around, right, to make him feel connected to the person. And then I listened to the song that came out by Leih Bryce called I Drive Your Truck, based on the lyrics this guy wrote for this competition. And I wanted to shoot myself. It was so fucking bad. And like everything was embarrassing. But the guy who wrote these lyrics like was crying over them. And his connection to it is different than ours.
Yeah.
and it makes more sense that he would be moved by it.
Exactly. And sometimes I think that those are like concrete things. You can be like, well, he really connected the lyrics or like the sentiment behind it or whatnot. And other times I think you just get like affected by a certain like song or piece of music, and there's not really a reason for it. I mean, you could break it down and be like, I like this because of these things, and perhaps you find like patterns of things you like, but sometimes it's just like, man, that hits you. And that's, I guess, honestly, when it comes down to it, that's really what art is about. And it doesn't really matter if something's better or worse than something else. It's really like, how does this affect you? Now, I'm not saying your opinion like counts for anything, because you're probably stupid still. But I guess what I'm saying is there's a difference between like the sublime and a piece of art. And I feel like, perhaps like an expert is more qualified to talk about something as a piece of art. But that,
in general,
but that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with this emotional factor that goes with it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's a good time to start talking about like the limitations of someone who can critique something.
Sure.
So when you critique something, you come from an entire perspective of experiences, like we've been saying this whole time. So your ability to judge something like this Leih Bryce song may not be for everyone. Your conclusion may not work for everyone, and that's fine. You still have to, like, if you're going to disagree with it, you might have the obligation to find out why.
Yeah.
But when you critique something, you have to be aware that you may not have the entire context necessary to appreciate it. And you can only critique based off what you know and the patterns you've experienced in your life. So I guess that's all I really have to say about that. But it's important to realize what implicit biases you have as a critiker. A critic? How a fucking critic? Did I mention I read a lot of poetry and books?
Obviously, we're very qualified to talk.
Jesus Christ. Why am I even on this show, dude? I'm terrible.
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, yes. And it kind of comes down to, it's like, well, I mean, art and music in general doesn't necessarily have to have anything like we talked about around it. Like, I want to write a piece of music. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I like. Put it out in the world. That could be it. But at least our society actually puts a lot of like weight on music in that sense of like, someone has good taste, or this song is the top song on the charts or whatever. Yeah. And that's somewhat arbitrary, at least at this point. I mean,
feels like it. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to do a shout out to all the girls I see on dating apps when they list their like Spotify listens and everything like that.
Dude.
And they say in their profile that they love music, and then you go on their Spotify recommendations, and we all know what those are like.
We do.
So
if I see one more Arctic Monkeys on a fucking, if I see it again on Bumble, I'm just gonna
but there's a great example. Arctic Monkeys is one of these bands that through the media or whatever has been decided to be like, this is good music.
Yes, tasteful.
Yes, and there's not actually anything behind that. I mean, like, whatever. Arctic Monkeys are probably fine. I don't really give a shit. But I'm not going to sit there and analyze it and be like, oh, this is like, in my opinion, good music.
Yeah.
But it's been cited that is. So now all these people think that they, in turn, have good taste. Mm-hmm. And if you say, I don't really like the Arctic Monkeys, they might be like, well, you're an idiot.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no like deference to like any sort of expertise in music.
And that's entirely made up by us. There's like no reason, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, we could all just listen to whatever we want and be happy, but we have to have our best of lists, and we have to, and I don't think it's a bad thing.
No, I love that shit, dude.
Yeah, because I think that's something we should talk about, and theoretically, that should push art forward. I don't think it does at this point.
It's tough to say.
Yeah, but if someone sucks, they should know they suck.
Yeah,
and they should go back and try harder. That doesn't happen.
No,
but.
And there's probably you can probably garner enough of an audience on your own to kind of have your own format justified in your own mind.
Oh, I mean, and then there we go. It's like the whole subjective thing's back.
Yeah.
But this, I mean, we're going, it never ends. We could go forever. But something you talked about way back, I don't remember what episode it was, but like how venues used to have like auditions to play at venues.
Yep. That was a thing that happened.
Yeah. And back then it was still about the money, but like, I'm sure whoever was holding these auditions actually cared if you had talent. And that doesn't, at least here in Seattle, that doesn't necessarily happen all the time. You can get a gig on a Tuesday night anytime you want, no matter what you sound like.
Yep. Which is good for me. No, so yeah, I don't remember when I said that, but it doesn't make me want to say that it points to a trend that the ability to think about music in certain terms has gone downhill. Possibly not, but like there's just so much opportunity now.
Yeah.
That maybe leads to a wider, oh God, where am I going with this? It's like a wider dispersal of music. So basically you can hear more of everything, but what you end up getting is like a weird conglomeration of certain people's opinions, because it's too much work to like sift through it all yourself if you're not devoting a lot of time like we do to find.
Sure. Well, I mean, even with the time we're devoting, where are we looking?
Yeah.
And it's like, and this comes down to, again, what we were talking earlier, whose opinion do I trust? And like, we look at someone like Scaruffi.
Piero Scaruffi.
I don't really know anything about his musical background. I actually have no clue.
Honestly, like the way he talks, sometimes I don't think he plays.
I don't think he does either.
But what leads him to have like certain opinions that I would almost like trust or like think are good?
Right. And like, obviously he's not going to be 100%, although you can't when he literally reviews just like fucking thousands of albums.
Yeah. And that's just,
throughout the years.
He's a fucking human being, right?
Yeah. But like, generally speaking, if he recommends an album, I tend to like it.
Yeah. I can think of a couple exceptions, but like,
yeah.
His opinions and like the articles he writes to support them seem pretty well founded and use terminology I support.
That's true. Even like in some cases where like he hates the Beatles, for instance,
which hurts my butt, but
and
whatever.
Like, I've read his article about that, and it's like I don't agree, but he's actually making points.
Yes, I can follow him.
Yeah.
I follow his logic.
Whereas music criticism and like general doesn't necessarily do that. I mean, shit. The fucking JW Cud or the 5 Seconds of Summer reviews that I was reading on our past episodes. Like, it was like, these people aren't actually saying anything. It's literally like, music feel good.
Yeah.
I like.
Yeah, and like they reference like the way it sounds, which is good, I guess, but like they talk about it in such a vapid and like a shallow, gross way.
Right. I mean, even Scaruffi doesn't get into like the technical details of music, and that's why I think he doesn't necessarily play, but like he was still really is informed by context, and he can discern like this overall sound that's happening, or even the little elements, and like what makes this different than some other band doing somewhat of the same thing.
Yeah, and he like tries to put it in context of what a listener would would feel as well.
Yeah,
which are things you can somewhat predict.
Yeah, and I think that's rare. I mean, even like Pitchfork, the other like huge one, like. No, I don't fucking think those guys know what they're talking about.
I actually frequently feel the opposite.
I honestly, I mean, it's like hipster selection. They have a fucking like dartboard, and they're like, this artist came out with an album.
Oh, it's good. Next.
Yeah.
And then like they hate the Mars Volta for some reason.
Yeah, and it's like
they just threw the dart.
Yeah,
they threw the Mars Volta dart at the opinion dartboard.
Exactly, because that's like, I mean, you can say a lot of things good and bad about them, but like to be overall, or even like like I said earlier, Rolling Stone hated Led Zeppelin.
Yeah,
like.
Cool.
There's no reason for that. You can dislike the music, but like,
there's no reason to.
You can't come out and be like, "This is crap," because I think on that subjective spectrum, they are rated higher than most bands.
Yes, and like that's literally just inherent in the way they perform this music, and I would say if you're writing their first album, we're just talking about Led Zeppelin now. If you rate their first album, a lot of their music is like pretty derivative, obviously, very blues, all that stuff. The forms are not super special, but they do a lot of really interesting, even if not good things. Like you don't even have to say they're good. They're different, they're new, and they're trying, and they don't sound bad,
Yeah.
So you can't say that Led Zeppelin's bad, Rolling Stone is fucking stupid. And they continue to be stupid to this day.
Oh, yes, 100%.
Yeah. And most music journalism sites are missing a trick here. They're missing the entire point.
And again, I do wonder how much of that is like their own opinions versus like the shareholders being like, so this person paid us this much money, so we need to.
Where's the machine tie-in?
But even like bloggers and shit, are just independent reviewers. It's like, I mean, it's all bias, and I don't know. Perhaps there just needs to be more general music education.
That has to be part of it, yeah.
I mean, you've talked before about going to Europe and like,
oh god, it's great, dude.
The crowd's just being way more receptive to things that American audiences are not.
Yes, and that's
Really.
I'll talk briefly about that because I've talked about it before. But when I was playing in Europe, it felt like the patterns in certain spots of songs that I thought were like a nice cathartic moment or otherwise good were things that they would react to as well in the audience. They would give a big yell, or like they would, get really quiet and listen, or whatever reaction seemed more appropriate to what I think is true.
Yeah.
And in America, that kind of occurrence is much less frequent.
Yeah.
At least in my experience.
Well, I mean, how many jazz musicians have moved to Europe after a certain point?
Fucking like all of them, dude. At least like all of the super famous ones spent like years there.
Oh, yeah. So I don't know. Maybe music education, or maybe there's just less emphasis on the superficial things in music. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what it is,
Yeah.
but it's different there, and it's tight. Yeah, everyone should try it, dude. It's badass.
Well, I feel like we've been talking in circles for a while. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up?
Let me check my several pages of notes here. Yeah. Blah, blah, blah. God, I'm such a fucking long-winded asshole. Nope.
I mean, okay, so I don't think there's really a conclusion that we can make.
No.
I stand by my theory of there being this objective subjective spectrum.
I like
don't
that.
necessarily know what the values are and where they lie. I mean,
Maybe that's something we can try and explore.
this might be something we explore later, but in any case, there has to be a reason that certain artists are generally rated higher than others.
Yeah, sell more copies or whatever.
Whatever. Just considered like esteem, whatever. But seems to be a general preference in a lot of cases. And I think there is a reason for that.
Luckily, the hatred for J.W. Cud is universal.
That's how we know music's subjective.
Hell yeah.
Everybody hates that song.
Man, dude. Yeah, that's the way to put it right there. But yeah, that's I think that's it for this topic. We will probably revisit this
I think we will.
several times throughout our podcasting
Perhaps we'll
career.
have smarter people on with us when we do it.
God, I hope so. But yeah, I think that does it for this topic. You got a rant for us or what?
Let's do the listening first, because I just ranted a lot and I want to
That's true.
talk
You want a
about
break?
something
All right,
I like.
all right. What have you been listening to then?
I've been listening to Jeff Beck's Wired album.
Nice.
Actually, weirdly enough, I think the first fusion album I listened to, even though Jeff Beck's not like a good fusion player. He's a good player.
Yeah, he's good.
I love Jeff Beck's guitar
Yeah,
playing.
he brings something to fusion that isn't necessarily fusion.
Yeah, I almost call it like rock jazz. not even jazz rock, but like rock jazz.
There's a term for that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's the fusion spectrum as well. You say.
Oh my god.
No,
We'll talk about other kinds of spectrums.
God. If you look at like the compositions on the album, he didn't even like write any of them. But they're all pretty basic 2 or 3 chord sort of funk grooves or like straight eighths kind of thing. Basic progressions. He mostly plays pentatonic. Jan Hammer's on it though. He shreds.
Oh,
yeah. But
He can play some fusion, all right?
he can play some fusion. I think it's basically it's like a blues rock guitar player being surrounded by like a lot of really good fusion players.
Yeah.
And it actually still really fucking works. Jeff Beck is just so expressive in his playing.
Totally.
And I really respect him for coming from the whole like British blues rock invasion school and just being like, nah, I'm gonna search for something better.
Yeah.
Or more. So
That's right.
objectively
You can't say that.
better.
I'm gonna adjust my spectrum.
But I don't know, for me, and I feel like this is for a lot of other like guitar players who grew up on like Zeppelin and stuff, like it's a really good introduction to fusion and their John Jazz and other
Gateway,
things like
yeah.
that. Yeah, it's a good gateway guitar player.
And yeah, he sounds fucking great
he's
too.
so
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, the way he approaches like articulation and soloing, and yeah, he's fucking great.
Oh, one of my top 5 guitar players, easy.
Hi. Yep, he's great.
Yeah, what about you?
I've been listening to. We talked about this earlier. Again, talk about like artists from other countries and how they value certain things over others. So I always try and find new things in that genre all the time. So I found this Egyptian singer who her name is Angham, Angham. I'm sorry for any Arab listeners. Don't
Wait, isn't that from Avatar?
Oh my God, you're stupid.
I mean the movie.
Yeah, I know. You're dumb. So yeah, the album is called Leih space Sebtaha.
I didn't catch that. Can you actually say the words?
Leih Sebtaha. I'm sorry, everyone,
Wow.
but it's sick. To me, like and probably why I like it in my subjectivity spectrum, it incorporates a lot of like Western elements into more super melody heavy Arab elements of music, because
That's cool.
in a lot of Arabian like classical music, they is the term we've used for it over here. It's very melody driven. Like there'll be like the same unison line for 10 minutes. So combining that with just a little more of the Western thing to get my, I guess, ear hooked, really gets me in there.
It's cool.
And it's a cool album.
Nice.
Check it out.
Nice. Yeah, a rant for me?
I don't think I do. I can't think of anything.
I got like a baby rant.
All right, baby rant.
I mean, so we haven't been playing shows, so we don't really have anything to rant about.
Yeah, again, it's kind of tight.
This isn't really I wouldn't say this is a rant necessarily. This is just something I find extremely odd, and I'm a little upset about.
Okay.
So we talked before about how Spotify sucks. And every once in a while, I go onto the playlist that they like, the Discover Weekly.
Yeah.
Right. And they make it for you. And generally for me, since I teach and I use Spotify when I teach, it's all like the most basic. They're like,
yeah.
you've never heard music before in your life,
Exactly.
right? Here's the Rolling Stones and shit like that. I mean, it's always like classic rock and stuff like that. But I went on it today just because I had my laptop and I was like, just put it on, background music. And the first song on this playlist was Frownland by Captain Beefheart.
Dude, what?
Not only was it Frownland by Captain Beefheart, it was an instrumental version of Frownland that I've never even heard before.
Was there like someone playing that melody?
No, sorry,
it's like a
instrumental as in
karaoke track?
Yes, essentially, they just did not have the vocal track on it.
That's real?
And that was the
exists?
very first song on my Discover Weekly playlist.
Man, I can't imagine anyone turning any of that off faster. Damn.
And that's, I guess here's where the rant is like, what the fuck, Spotify? like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Because, like, even if I was, like, listening to a lot of, like, maybe, like, free jazz or experimental music or psychedelic shit like that, like, okay, put Captain Beefheart on there, but, like, this weird version without the vocal.
No, dude. I can't even think of what it sounds like.
So, I mean, it was just fucking noise. Like, I mean, I liked it still, kind of. But it definitely, like, misses something without him, like, singing over it.
Yeah,
It was just, like, weird guitar patterns.
Yeah, it's almost as if that song was, like, written with vocals on it. And I guess I can put that in my brief little rant.
Right,
I'll piggyback off your rant.
Right.
Is putting... This is something we talked about in episode 2, Anatomy of an Album. Putting filler on your album is like bad generally. It's annoying, and like sometimes there are good filler tracks.
No, it's almost somewhat of a necessity in some cases, but
It's fair.
Yeah.
But when your filler takes place in the form of instrumental versions of the songs that were already on your album tacked on at the end, I will come to your house and beat the shit out of you. That's bullshit.
Where are you hearing this?
So this is a thing in a couple Emerson, Lake, and Palmer albums, which is another weird. This is why it reminded me of Captain Beefheart, because it's like, it's fucking weird. Why would you have it without the vocals, the things that it's written for? And like they do this on a couple albums, and it's I'm trying to remember a third one by like a more mainstream band. It made me want to die. I can't remember.
Where are these actually like fillers or are these like bonus tracks?
They're fillers.
Really?
Yeah, at least on one of them.
Oh boy, that's rough.
It's rough, and it's like, dude, why? I guess they're at the end. I guess you can call them bonus tracks, but
Well, that's what I'm wondering if they were re-released.
oh no,
later.
they're on the release. Yeah,
Oh, that's weird.
isn't that weird?
That's
Isn't that
very
make?
weird.
It's not bad. And even if it's on the re-release, like.
I mean, I've heard
What?
that. Like, okay, that's another thing we could rant about forever. Is like all the fucking remasters where they had to tack on a bunch of crap that no one
It's
really
like the
wants to
fucking
hear.
Star Wars fucking remakes,
It
dude.
is kind of like that. I mean, like I have so many. Like when I first started getting into CDs, I have so many albums from the '70s that are, all of a sudden are 2 discs, and the whole second disc
God.
is like demo when they were all drunk off their asses, and you're like, sweet,
I believe
sounds good.
I believe this also happened on an Anatomy of an Album where I talk about for my entire life I thought Thriller was an hour and 20 minutes long.
Yeah,
And that's the problem is people are going to get exposed to this music the wrong way.
yeah.
Like, dog, Thriller is way shorter and actually better than I thought. I thought Thriller was like kind of bad.
There's an intent, you see, behind the
What?
album, and then people decide that they need an extra. And that's the thing too. It's like I feel like, especially back in the day, I don't think this happens as much anymore. But like back 10, 15 years ago, where like people were still making this transition from like records or tapes to CDs, and like if you remastered it for the CD and make it sound better or whatnot, people would probably buy it. Because they have now CD players in the car and whatnot.
Yeah.
Right? So you don't need this whole fucking second album of shit that no one wants to listen to get people to buy it.
Yeah, you don't need
It's
it.
so stupid.
Yeah, and it's also, it literally is actively harmful.
God, I wonder why the record companies are going under.
God, I wish they were going under faster sometimes. It's painful what some of these, like, just one more quick reference, and I swear I'm done, is Who's Next, right? And the fucking 8 bonus tracks they added in the remix of Behind Blue Eyes, and like everything sucks.
It's like, why would I want to listen to this?
I already liked it. It was
Like
great.
maybe like the only no, I'm not even gonna say it. No, it's bad. It's bad.
Objectively
it's
bad.
Objectively bad.
Fuck music,
There's
dude.
nothing good about it. I will stand behind perhaps like a B-side album or something like that if you really want those.
Sure.
If you really want, I mean, actually, I know a couple good B-side. Like the Pixies B-sides album is actually really good. It's a bunch of music they never like released on their albums. I think that's cool.
Sure.
I don't, but again, that's just a collection of songs. It's not like an album,
Right.
You know.
Now that we're angry again, this is Music Sucks and I Want to Die.
Remember, again, everything we said was correct.
Yep.
If you disagree, let us know. We'll make fun of you in our next episode.
Great. I'm Jake.
I'm Matt.
Bye.